Venri Chapter 2 Timeline After the end of Mass Effect 1. Shepard. Saren, the ultimate jumpy fucker, was dead. Really dead. She had checked several times. The Citadel was rebuilding, and there were a lot of parties and alcohol because the Keepers did most of the rebuilding anyway. After Vermeer, Shepard's crew had come together in purpose. Now, on the Citadel, they were a true team. Kaidan had gotten his head on straight. Tali had always had her head on straight. The only reason Shepard didn't bring Tali out on every mission was Shepard's concern for her health. Shepard had nightmares about holes in Tali's suit. Rex was now a celebrity on the Citadel, with no end of requests to take his picture with fans near the Krogan monument. Liara had become less helpless, more determined. Garrus wasn't the same as when they had started. Garrus had become indispensable. Shepard had every reason to be proud of her crew, and it showed that she was. Shepard had invited everyone out for a memorial party for Ashley, and had invited along anybody else who wanted to honor her service. Since microphones and reporters were everywhere around Shepard lately, that meant 1,000 or so people, with more coming in. Flux was flooded and spilling over. The party was extending down the causeways. Candles, pictures of Ashley and vids of Ashley were flickering and flashing on tabletops and walls and impromptu displays. Garrus managed to make it through the rowdy crowd to the inside of Flux. He recognized the team's table, but he didn't see Shepard. While he was looking around for her, he noticed a human woman that had drawn a crowd, and he could see why. Her back was turned, but he got the impression of shimmering, creamy skin, beautiful lines of her shoulders and back, with gentle curves of her waist, hips, and calves. Her hair was midnight black, flowing down her back in loose curls, and her dress was a combination of hologram and fabric that gave the illusion of molten gold dripping onto her shoulders, forming rivulets down her body and dripping off her mid-thigh. Her shoes matched in animation, gold droplets splashing onto her feet and solidifying and melting into filigree high-heeled sandals with forming and fading raw beads of gold. She looked like an elemental goddess, all fire and flow. He was mesmerized, surprised to find a human attractive, but appreciating the play of strength and delicacy of this level of theater. That dress was fascinating. As she turned toward him, he noticed the gold forming rivulets under her breasts, and he wanted to touch that fabric. He wanted to touch that skin. Holy shit. That was Shepard. She turned to face him, and the goddess waved to him enthusiastically. She was wearing stylized gold-rimmed contact lenses, and her eyes were reminiscent of emerald jewelry. Oh, holy shit. He wanted to touch Shepard. He was going to blame the dress and leave it at that. Come on, that was a nice dress. Someone put a lot of work into that dress. Shepard had good taste. Fuck. He sat down heavily at the empty seat next to Tali, and everyone exchanged greetings. Kaidan offered to get another round of drinks, so he put in his order. Garrus was looking for a little bit of camaraderie here. Everyone was okay with Shepard in that dress? Well, now I feel underdressed. Tali leaned her mask closer. I would like to drip gold, but that dress would kill me. Liara also leaned in. That dress was intended to kill. Don't you think it's to honor Ashley, though? That's what I thought. Ashley always looked so good. Of course it is. Her makeup was always perfect. That woman could blend. Kaidan brought the drinks back, and Garrus raised a toast. Ashley could kill, too. To Ashley. Liara and Tali laughed, and Kaidan drank to Ashley, killing people. He didn't get a chance to talk to Kaidan, who was mobbed by women and a few hopeful men. Good for him. Kaidan had come a long way, and he wasn't stuck with his eyes glued to Shepard anymore. Reversal of fortune. Joker made it back to the table, risking his life to be here in the crowd. Brave man. One solid shove, and he'd be short a few limbs. dancing for Joker was out. Ashley deserved the effort being made. He felt proud to be a part of it. Garrus tore his eyes off Shepard again and watched the crowd. Rex was dancing. It was majestic. Rex had a crowd of men and women encouraging him to dance more, and there was so much flailing, it was entertaining. Then they all started dancing like him, and it was even more entertaining. Shepard noticed, started to laugh, and ran over to dance next to Rex. They were absolutely terrible. Shepard could not dance. Rex could not dance. But they could live. And it was joyous. A joyous Krogan wasn't something he'd thought he'd ever see. They were both laughing so hard that Garrus couldn't help but smile. He wouldn't have seen it if he hadn't been watching her ass in that dress, the way it curved, and there was bouncing, and then a hand. Looks like someone else wanted to touch the dress. He was at first relieved that someone else's self-control broke before his did, but then he was viciously angry, about to stand and express that. Before he could move, Shepard whipped around once, not breaking her ridiculous dance moves, her laughter, or her focus on Rex, and the guy who owned the hand was staggering off the dance floor, fingers broken at odd angles. Garrus admired her work. That's my girl. Oh, holy shit. He thought Shepard was his girl. He ordered another drink. He was having some trouble just holding still, but if he couldn't keep his shit together internally, he could at least look as though he owned dignity somewhere in storage. The song ended, and she made her way back to their table. Most people didn't recognize her as Commander Shepard, but word had gotten around enough that people stopped her to thank her for her service, her invitation to include the Citadel in honoring Ashley, and compliment her on her dress. He heard her say, "It's for Ashley. I never got to see her dance. Thank you for coming out to celebrate her." She broke away from her admirers and melted into the chair next to him, then said, "Garrus, I'm so glad you made it." "Good to see you, Commander." "Please, call me Moram. The only person whose rank matters this evening is Ashley." He'd never called her Moram. She swapped between calling him Garrus or Vicarian, but she'd always been Shepard, or Commander. Drinking to Ashley had taken its toll, and if she was going to be informal, he'd go with it. "All right, Moram." His voice tasted the sound, drawing it out in the sub-register. He liked saying her name. "You look lovely." Ashley would have appreciated the gesture. It's gratifying to see all these people here to honor her. "It is an amazing dress, isn't it? I have to give it back tomorrow. It's worth more than the Normandy or something, but Arakan Thalassa, a ridiculously talented Asari designer, offered it to me for the night, along with the hair, the shoes, and the contacts, and I decided, what the hell? Ashley deserves some drama." Very effective. She turned and took his hands in hers, startling him. She leaned in close and said, "Garrus, I could not have done this without you. You, more than anybody here, allowed me to do my job. An impossible job. Our impossible job. You can't know what this means to me, what you mean to me." She stood, leaned forward, and kissed the center of his crest, putting her gold-dripped breasts at his eye level. He had time to discover that she smelled good after dancing. Then she was gone. He sat there wondering what the hell had just happened and whether or not he had lipstick in the middle of his crest. Eventually he asked Tally. The answer was yes. They couldn't decide whether or not it would be offensive to remove it. They had no idea. He left it there. "Garrus, Tally had gone back to the flotilla to finish her pilgrimage. Moram had given her a trove of information on the Geth, and she was eager to present it. Rex returned to Tuchanka, inspired to help shape the future of his people. Moram had recovered his family armor. Caden and Liara remained on the Citadel, waiting as Moram did to hear whether or not the Normandy would be their home again. Garrus saw Moram often on the Citadel, usually at her urging. He thought of her as Moram now, and not Shepard, although he rarely said it, and she didn't insist after Ashley's memorial. Garrus had regained some of his perspective, after having been shocked to find her not just admirable, but attractive. Moram changed her makeup daily, but he wouldn't be caught off guard again. He expected her to be beautiful, and she was. There were times when he wanted to touch her and see the contrast between his hand and her skin, but he kept it to himself. He always wore gauntlets out of habit, so he was spared the opportunity to give in to that temptation. It was hard to predict whether she was going to be brilliant or brain-dead on any given set of circumstances. Heavy on the brilliant, and occasionally even her brain-dead turned out to be brilliant, but there was a hefty chunk of brain-dead in there that made him wary and concerned. She was intuitive, fluid, and given to taking huge chances on little evidence. A Turian commander like her would not survive long in the hierarchy. She was unpredictable. She had no standards of engagement. She just engaged. Her style was not teachable. He'd always thought that the even and specific standards of Turian training were ideal, but he had begun to see the flaw when there was too much sameness. She seemed more willing to break a mold for the fun of breaking it compared to a Turian ambition to fit it perfectly. He'd had to concede that occasionally out of human chaos came something that couldn't be produced by other means, and she was the best example he'd seen. As a training exercise, his time on the Normandy had been invaluable. He'd seen her use of power and strategy. She won big, but she also lost big. She seemed to accept the failure as a cost of the success, measuring them together for their cumulative value instead of measuring them against each other in a win-lose ratio. He saw the need for that approach when the odds of failure were very high. If she needed a win, she would throw everything she had at a problem, fully committed. He had been trained to never place a bet or commit a resource until the odds were known, tweaked, and manipulated to his advantage. She dove at a 3% chance without hesitation. He would always wait until things were at least 51% in his favor. He had come to realize that he was a leader for the day-to-day, when things could be arranged that way, and time and preparation were resources taken for granted. She was a leader for when the mission was hopeless by everyone else's standards. That was her day-to-day. Strategically, he thought he understood her, though he couldn't duplicate her style even if he'd wanted to. Socially, he saw that she was expert at manipulation, and she chose inspiration as her usual approach. If she could not inspire, she would intimidate. If she could do neither, she tended to shoot before anybody else had realized that the negotiation was over. On analysis, he'd realized that what made her decisions seem random or disorganized was the fact that there was a factor missing in her that was present in most successful people. Ego. Many people sought power to fuel their ego, and then their ego fueled the search for more power, more status. Turians and humans in general shared that motivation. So she wasn't just un-Turian, she was also inherently unhuman. Or was inhuman the word? Turians knew their place by knowing the hierarchy and status calculations in each moment, formalized and reinforced. She saw status as a means to an end, not an end in itself. It was something she used, something that was not part of her. Her ego was like her gun. She only required it in specific circumstances, and at the end of the day she put it down. Garrus could measure his merit in Turian terms with his rifle. He was good at that, therefore he was good. He was of use. That use was inherent and could be measured. He'd also analyzed her solution to Salion. When she'd decided to turn him in, she hadn't stressed what many people would have. The credit. No interest in taking the credit for herself, not encouraging Garrus to think about his status if he brought Salion in. She discarded it as a factor to calculate into her decisions. He'd wondered if she'd seen something in him, wondering if he could reach beyond his ego as well. He'd like to know how she saw him. Was ego something missing in her, or something she ignored and didn't feed? Hard to tell. Did she think that if he were more like her that it would benefit him? It wasn't likely that he would aspire to be like her, though he admired her. What she did was like juggling fire. He wasn't interested in juggling fire, just putting it out far away from himself. He suspected that Moram saw no inherent use in herself until she was doing something. Then she had whatever use she could create in that moment under those circumstances, quicksilver, able to flow along the landscape, respond to gravity. Selfless. Not only in the traditional way of being benevolent and outwardly directed, but also selfless in that she focused on a problem's solution, willing to alter herself to solve that problem. She was Schrodinger's shepherd. She didn't know who she was going to be, or if she was going to be alive or dead, until she opened the boxes of her decisions. She was impatient with being the subject of conversation or speculation. Complimenting or admiring her tended to bore her. It didn't make her upset. It was simply useless information, as it was neither a critique, which could be of interest to her strategy, nor humor, which she seemed to admire like fireworks that lit up her day. Humor made her feel in good company, keeping calm in the storm. Turians didn't have that much use for humor, but he'd learned to enjoy it. It was in the same category as poetry, and now alcohol. An acquired taste enjoyed in exclusive company. He was not raised or trained to be quicksilver, but a forged metal in a useful shape, interchangeable with many other Turians, and differentiated only through experience and skill level. There couldn't be two of Moram on a team without chaos, and she recognized that she needed him as a foil. He compensated for her, and she valued him for it. She leaned on his humor as she leaned on him in a fight, testing limits, venturing further, enjoying the range, juggling more fire, throwing it higher and farther, keeping more of it in the air at a time. He had followed the lead of his commander and altered his communication style, his methods, to complement hers, and he had a taste for snark now. It wouldn't have been so easy to change if he hadn't been itching to do it anyway after his time at CSEC. Following someone whose law was no law at all was ultimately very easy to do. At first he had thought her style appallingly familiar and intrusive, and then he saw it as she saw it. It was an open line of communication where she was able to determine location, disposition, and need in battle. Out of battle, she knew the patterns, needs, and abilities of her team. They could perform at their best, and she had early warning of conflict or issue and can handle it before it affected a mission. She was trying to break down the barriers of species communication, allowing herself to be insulted and teased by her team. Moram and he had honed their humor game over time until it was a quick shot, fast-paced dare of wit. She held herself up as a target. He shot her down. That's the way she liked it. It reassured her that his wits were sharp and he was on his game. Most people weren't up to it on that level. Tally was in awe of her. Caden was intimidated by and attracted to her, and so was Liara. Rex took the invitation for informality to be crude and abrasive. Moram shrugged it off, seeming to appreciate Rex for his predictability. Garrus had told her that she looked lovely, and she had agreed with him. He supposed he'd have responded the same way if she'd complimented his marksmanship. Yes, of course. She took her beauty or her skill for granted, not worthy of comment, no more worthy of mention than sand on a beach. As much as he'd liked to stay part of her crew, he'd made other plans, and would pursue them, particularly since she had no command currently. He'd left the Normandy and had hoped that would change something in how she was permitted to see him. The main change he made in his plans was assuming they would work together in the future. They were both good at what they did, and together there was a synergy. He still couldn't navigate her habit of speaking sexually, valuing skill and encouraging intimacy, and then leaving it at that. He'd never been interested in a human, but she had all the right signals. Only the caution of not being like Caden or Liara kept him firmly on the side of the line he was on. He had time. He'd figure it out eventually. He wouldn't push the issue. Yet. Someday the odds would be 51% in his favor. He would play to his strengths as she played to hers. On the Citadel, this lack of ego was being used against her. She had a party for Ashley, therefore she was frivolous and attention-seeking. She went after Saren, therefore she provoked him into attacking the Citadel. She had involved members of different species in her crew, treating them with respect and inclusion. Therefore she betrayed her own species or had certain members of other species as pets. That particular line of rumor was gaining strength, getting uglier, and developing sexual embellishments. Casual sex between Turians was not stigmatized as long as neither of the Turians were bonded to another. As it never happened, it wasn't an issue, unlike the human equivalent of being married and unfaithful. Turian and human sex was new over the past decades and definitely stigmatized by both humans and Turians. Allergic reactions between the species could result in dramatic death if precautions were not taken. People driven to try interspecies sex because of its edgy rebellion also tended to veer toward violence. Turians were appalled by the criminal sexual behavior of humans, having discovered that such a thing as rape existed. Some Turians that tended toward the lawless began to embrace the idea of rape of humans. That bit of social evolution was putting an ugly sheen on any relationship Morim had with him. He could try to protect her from that speculation, treat her with deference and respect, but he knew that everything could and would be twisted into something ugly. Her lipstick mark on his forehead, entirely unintentional on her part, was turned into some sort of brand of ownership in whispers. He wasn't sure she wasn't attracted to him. He was sure Caden had never heard a comment about his biotics making her nipples hard. According to quite a few citizens of the Normandy and the Citadel, Caden was a very attractive man. Morim treated Caden carefully, as she would a child. For now, Garrus was content to let things continue, maintain the fact that she felt comfortable with him, free to tell him anything. She was different with him than she was with other people, that was a certainty. When she spoke to others, she turned to business, her face closed, her humor hidden or absent, the light in her eyes replaced by calculation. She would test people's senses of humor a few times, and if they didn't want to play, she'd refine her language and match their tone. She appeared sexually unavailable, but that just made him want to convince her to be available. Somehow. He decided she was ignorant or defiant of both Turian and human customs, and that he couldn't define her actions according to what was expected. He enjoyed her company more than he'd enjoyed anybody's company. He wanted to see what was going to happen next. He liked watching, being present, being available to her when she called, and enjoying the fact that she called nobody else. He was enjoying her ignorance in his own way. It was refreshing. He probably could have told her he'd like to touch the hollow of her throat, and she'd say, "It's true, I have a very nice throat," and continue with her previous sentence. When they were out at bars together, he'd discovered that it was easy to keep her to himself. Her ease with him telegraphed to others that she was with him. If he adjusted his own body language slightly, he could keep it that way. He could keep people from approaching her if he chose. He didn't even feel bad about it, because her response to people approaching her sexually was always rejection. She'd be kind, or she'd be firm, or she'd be funny, but it was always rejection. He kept her from having to repeat herself, kept their conversations from being interrupted. Women and men approached him when he was alone, which she noticed, but she wasn't jealous. She seemed to want to set him up with someone. By this point, she was so clueless he could flat out mess with her. As a bonus, she enjoyed being messed with. He remembered a conversation they'd had while getting progressively drunker at some bar or another. She'd said, "You know, you don't have to stay with my lame ass. Why don't you leave with 1 or 7 of the women that are hoping for some Garrus? I like your lame ass, Morin. Don't worry about me. Damn it, man, you were on a ship for a year. You saved a lot of people. You deserve nookie. Go forth and nook. I don't see you nooking. No, not me. Don't get me wrong. I like sex and all, but I have fewer opportunities than you appear to have. Plus, there's the fact that I'm just not interested, what with all the death about to happen to everyone. My obsessions lie elsewhere. Can you see me meeting a guy right now? Before they got to my bra, I bet anything I'd have said something about a reaper. I'd kill the mood. No reason to do that to an unsuspecting citizen. With my luck, he'd be a reporter anyway. But you should make some women happy, man. You know what I like about you, Morum? What? You're really, really stupid sometimes. Unreservedly, and without apology. Really stupid. I know, right? Okay, I'm sorry. What were we saying before? Before I was monumentally stupid? The idea of trying to navigate a relationship right now was out of the question. She was busy with plans. The media was busy trying to tear her down and using him as the means to do that. They needed to show that he was not her pet, and she was not his Keletrin. An ugly Turian word he'd heard enough of lately when people thought they were out of his hearing. Keletrin was a Turian dish of fermented meat in a fragile wrapper, street food, something cheap, messy, easily devoured, and then the wrapper discarded. He had an opportunity to publicly define the relationship and change the narrative, so he would take it. There was a Turian reception on the Presidium, and Morum had been invited. He was expected to attend. She'd called him to confirm he was going. There's a Turian thing. You mean like me? No, a boring thing. A reception, I think. At the Presidium Embassy, yes. You're going? Only if you are. I'm expected to attend. I think it's mostly photo opportunities and a chance for Turian Command to make it look like humans and Turians can get along and shoot things together, even if we can't eat the same food. Okay, if you weren't already going, I was going to ask you to escort me so I don't screw it up insulting Turian flower arrangements or something. Good call. You have no idea how many wars have been started by flower arrangements. We take that stuff seriously, the races and the lilacs. Roses and lilacs? See? You said it wrong. That's war. Right there. I'm screwed. It'll be fine. The Alliance has delivered a gown. A gown! I'm going to trip. You're not going to trip. Well, you might. And I might laugh. I swear after I finish laughing, I'll help you up. I've changed my mind. You might trip. Remember that whole thing about not starting a war? So it's really a specter parade. Well, a specter and a prospective specter, a prospector. You think you're funny, but I'm no longer under your command. I don't have to laugh at your crappy jokes, Shepard. I'm hilarious. You know it. Can we arrive together? Please? I won't trip you. Promise? I promise. Okay. You'll be fine, and you won't start a war, neither of us will trip, and I won't let you die of poisoning. Right, so, boring Turian thing. Right. A gown, Garrus. Leave the guns at home. There has to be a place for a holster. Somewhere. Goodbye, Shepard. Goodbye, Garrus. At this rate, there was no need to tell her he enjoyed her company, not as long as she kept making clear that she enjoyed his. They met at the transport stand and walked up together. Morum had hooked her arm through his. Her hand was resting on his arm plates. It wasn't exactly his hand on her skin, but it was the reverse. A step closer. She looked regal in a long gown of copper silk that brought out the lighter highlights in her hair, which was coiled on her head elaborately. Her makeup was severe. Her already pale skin was paler and less translucent, with dramatic eye and lip makeup, but otherwise no color on her cheeks, leaving her cheekbones to cast shadows. She looked like a marble sculpture in transformation, coming to life beginning in her mouth and eyes. He amended his earlier thought. She didn't just look regal. She was regal. He had tried not to disappoint the event and had broken some formal wear out of storage. It was a stylized, draped, untailored Vicarian blue and ivory jacket that skimmed the sides of his stern blade and exposed the ridges of chest, arms, and carapace over pants with cutaways that had the same effect on his leg ridges and spurs. He felt naked without his visor. The Presidium was lined with reporters, and she ignored their questions as they passed. Commander Shepard, do you still insist that the Reapers are a threat, or are you going to admit that you concocted that entire story to keep yourself from being tried at court-martial? Shepard, are you still commander? The Alliance has paperwork pending on a lawyer's desk to indict you for theft and fraud. What do you have to say about that? Commander Shepard, this is a Turian event. You saved the Turian council member, and you're on the arm of a Turian. Are you also in the pocket of a Turian? You've betrayed the human race, killing Ashley Williams and wiping out a large part of the Alliance fleet in this sector. When will you answer for that? Shepard's hand tightened on his arm, but this wasn't a shock to either of them. They'd both heard these accusations, and worse. It would have been nice to kill a few reporters, but it was better to remain the Turian whose arm she was on and not give them any attention at all. He leaned down slightly to her ear and said, Commander Shepard, body parts belonging to reporters have been found all over the Presidium. Where did that gun come from? Is that holster designer? Her response for the crowd was a regal nod, and he was rewarded with a slight tremble of her arm and gown as she tried to keep from laughing. Shepard. She was infuriated on Garrus's behalf. She'd made him come to this damn thing with her, and he was getting splattered with the mud they were flinging at her. Not that he couldn't handle it. She just didn't want him to have to handle it. She hadn't looked at the reporters because she didn't want to decide to track them down later. It would be funny if it weren't so dangerous. She couldn't afford to ignore this for long. Appreciation for her efforts was giving way to resentment and excuses for species hatred. She knew the Council, the Alliance, and Turian Command had issues with her and weren't above some propaganda to solidify their political causes. She couldn't triangulate damage because it was coming from every direction, potentially. She knew it was the right decision to be here with him, but it was bringing him into yet another firefight, this time without armor or weapons, because she needed him. Tonight, all she was expected to do was to hold up a dress and not break anything, and she'd already virtually broken the not break anything rule in her head by imagining dead people. After formal introductions on entering the reception, she chose a table in the corner, with no windows behind her. She was always twitchy when her back was exposed in unfamiliar circumstances. Garrus joined her. So we hold court here, and then run away? Can I run away? No running. Not in those heels. High probability of tripping. I'm here primarily to prevent that. Do you know anyone here? Yes. There are a lot of people from CSEC. Okay, so it's a siege situation. We can do that. All we need is ammo. Right. I'll go get some drinks. Shepard laughed and then relaxed after his casual tone made clear to her that she was overreacting. She would manage until he got back. She remembered she'd been invited for species outreach, and she wasn't going to be ritually dismembered. Unless Turians did that, in which case Garrus probably would have warned her. Garrus seemed entirely relaxed, as usual. She was feeling threatened on several levels she couldn't define, and a few that she could. She should shake off the reporter questions. Everything she'd said or done lately, kind or irritable or just standing around breathing, had been whipped into some sort of drama in the media. She took a deep breath, decided to be on her best behavior, and let the rest go. There were definitely threats, but she'd have to take them as they came. Garrus returned with the drinks, a Turian woman walking with him. Shepard felt out of place, the same way Garrus had likely felt out of place on the Normandy, surrounded by faces and customs that were a mystery. Together they looked amazing. Garrus was striking. He was always handsome to her, and right now he radiated strength and purpose. The paint on the female Turian's face was a deep purple in fine feather sprays, her face more curved in line than Garrus's, with a long mandible that flowed back from her jaw into a graceful inward arch to frame her face on either side. Her gown was a rich silver with accents of what looked to be some sort of leather, and the same purple on her face. Cutaways on her gown were focused more on the angled plates of her upper chest and waist, her skirt a fall of separated strands of fabric that allowed her legs to move freely, shifting over her spurs and knees. Well, hell, why didn't I get that dress? That looks much more practical. Seeing them together gave her a pang of something she didn't have time to label before they reached her. Garrus introduced her as Sildiv, a member of CSEC that he had worked with on several occasions. Sildiv stood formally, and Moram had to remind herself that based on the other attendants to this occasion, it wasn't just formal. It was Turian. She was reminded of Garrus when they'd first met. Shepard said, "Please, Sildiv, call me Moram and join us. I'd enjoy hearing about CSEC." She imagined she wouldn't be getting any wild stories, and she was right. Sildiv sat, and to Shepard's relief did exactly as she'd asked politely, and they talked about CSEC, promotions, deaths, and mission stats, catching Garrus up on things he'd missed. Garrus's humor was gone, replaced by formal purpose, and Moram considered how far she'd taken him out of his comfort zone and how well he'd adapted. She'd take his cue, do things his way. She owed him far more than that. She straightened her shoulders and adjusted her posture, trying to adopt small body language cues in the style of the Turians subtly, without appearing to mimic, which might make them think she was mocking them. She didn't have a mandible and didn't understand their movements unrelated to speech, but she would make do with some sincere effort. She pared her language down, removed humor, idiom, and swears, asked few questions, interrupted not at all, and remained focused. She answered questions asked of her succinctly, trying to front-load the information requested in few words. It was fortunately small talk with no political slant, thankfully. No accusations or angling. She liked Sildiv. The drink he'd bought her was non-alcoholic, which was another helpful touch, because drunk and nervous was not a good public relations strategy. Looking at Garrus and Sildiv speak, Moram was reminded of the first impression of seeing them together. Garrus should be happy. Garrus should have someone. He was back on the Citadel, and now he had a chance to be back with his people. She had almost gotten him killed so many times, it seemed a miracle he was alive at all. She would make tonight about him. The idea of Garrus having someone, being with someone, was captivating. She lost track of conversation for a moment, imagining Sildiv and Garrus together, and then got a little stuck because she had no idea how Turians did such things. Then she decided that was for the best, because although this might be an excellent opportunity to ask about such things in this setting, it likely wasn't the wisest use of her time. Remember war, she reminded herself. Do not ask the Turians about sexual behavior. That shouldn't be too hard to remember as a rule. Garrus being happy would be nice, though. Music began to play, instruments Moram didn't know. It was mostly percussion. She turned to look at the source. Oh, shit, dancing. There was dancing. Fuck. Well, nobody could make her do it. She'd just keep her ass in her chair. Couples had begun to head onto the floor, but they didn't stay couples. Each couple had one female Turian leading onto the floor, their hands clasped. The couples were either two females or a female and a male. Then the group coalesced into a spiral or a starburst or a geometrical shape, breaking back down into couples or individuals, and then forming again. There were limited spots in the growing geometry, and one or two people would be left out of each component of the patterns forming, a line or an arch or a spiral, and those people broke off into couples or individuals on the edges of the design, reintegrating themselves back in on the next pattern. She had no idea how the dance could accommodate so many people and combinations. She didn't see a repeated pattern. Well, that was cool. And very Turian. Everyone part of the whole, supporting the needs of the changing, intricate whole, becoming only couples or individuals as the group required, accepting being in or out with equal grace. The women initiated each participating couple. Garrus said, Morim, remember when I told you that Turian art is out in the world? Here is an example of what I meant. It's beautiful. Sildiv stood and offered her hand to Morim and said, Morim, come be a part. Morim's knees tensed, and a chorus of fuck went through her head, but it didn't reach her face. It must have reached at least her eyes, because she saw Garrus lean forward very casually into her line of sight and give an incremental nod, and then focus his eyes on the dance floor. It was the same signal they'd often used to decide what to focus fire on, what to kill in silence, without giving away their positions or using their hands. All right, then. For Garrus. She was going to kill it? Or it would kill her. Sildiv held her hand and led her onto the floor, and Morim tried to not sprain her ankles on the high heels or trip on the tight gown. She did stumble a few times, but it wasn't as intimidating as she thought it might be. She wasn't anywhere near as graceful as the Turians surrounding her. She felt that the attention was on her, but it was benevolent and nurturing, as though this was what they would do for a child. A clumsy child. Growing up, joining society, learning how to dance. Sildiv's hand left hers and another Turian took it, and she always had a partner and was not abandoned to the outside where she would have felt lost entirely, unable to make her way back. A Turian woman led Garrus onto the dance floor, and he joined the dance, blending in seamlessly with the others. She began to notice personality in each Turian, specific moves they initiated themselves, a style they had developed, showing in their turn, or the way they framed their shoulders or angle of a wrist. Nobody let her step on their toes, though she certainly could have managed several times if they hadn't been fast enough to steady her balance, help her back on course, be out of her way when she careened in the wrong direction. They were smiling, laughing, or encouraging, not insulting or angry. It encouraged her to be smiling and laughing quietly in response. Then she also noticed that although there were many humans and Asari in attendance, she was the only non-Turian in the dance. Her eyes closed over a slight sting of tears, then she was whirled back out into the experience. She followed their lead and became a little less clumsy. She enjoyed every moment of it until the music stopped and the dancers halted. Turians approached her as she walked back to their table, thanking her for being a part, and telling her it was an honor to dance with her. She could only say, and not enough times, that it was an honor for her as well. Sitting back down at the table, the music continued, but the dancing was not as formal, and there were couples that remained couples and individuals. Asari and humans were dancing, as well as Turians. It had broken down her sense of separation to be in that dance. Turians came up to her and to Garrus, introduced themselves, thanked her for attending, thanked her for being a part, thanked her for her work. Garrus was asked to dance the rest of the night. Female Turians approaching him before he made it back to his chair sometimes. and he graciously accommodated them all. Moram wasn't left alone, but she wasn't asked to dance again. She was engaged in conversation for the evening, almost exclusively from the dancers, recognizing faces and clothes, trying to remember the names that went with them. Her eye would stray to see Garrus dancing, and she thought over and over again, he should be happy. Was he interested in any of them? Was he bonded with any of them? Had he slept with any of them? That man can dance, and he should be happy. A few tears stung at the edges of her eyes again, but she turned back to the Turian talking to her, and listened to the group around her discuss unimportant things, including her as they could. Garrus. He thought the night was a success. The dancing had been a surprise. He might have expected it, might have warned her, but she had been nervous enough already. She had accepted Sildiv's invitation as he'd hoped, and the only problem would have come if Moram herself had asked Garrus to dance. From what he knew of her, he had assumed the chance of that was 0%, if not a negative. Turian tradition was that the women asked, and as long as she didn't ask him and he didn't ask her, that would show to the Turians, at least, that their relationship was only professional. Had he asked her, it would have been worse than if she had asked him, because he would have been abandoning Turian tradition for human custom. Inexcusably rude. He danced with as many Turian women as he could, and enough of them asked for him to make his point. He'd been sexually involved casually with most of them, including Sildiv, and it simply appeared to everyone that he was doing what Turian Command wanted, making his way back to Citadel life, proving he was Spectre material among other Spectres. Moram had no idea how many other Spectres were in that room, and he would keep it that way. Let her think that she was the guest of honor. To cynical Turian eyes, what had appeared to happen was that she was the only human Spectre in a room populated with Turian Spectres, isolated and to a large extent dependent on their whims, a glaring singularity among the established pattern, not likely to be repeated. To kind Turian eyes, she had been non-threatening and endearing in her inexpert dancing, willing to accept her social and skill disadvantage with good grace. To everybody, he had appeared to be a Turian, among other Turians, welcoming and polite to the human with whom he had served, but only so far. Moram had relaxed and spent the evening in dignified conversation with many of the people that might have been willing to dismiss her as a human loose cannon, her personal touch and presence making them more willing to see her as an ally. That's my girl. He wasn't surprised to think it anymore.